Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to travel back to a time when corsets were tight, toilets were a myth, and a long hot bath might be the most suspicious thing a person could do. Imagine this. You wake up to the scent of coal smoke, sour milk, and something you can't quite place like a wet dog that rolled in despair. Welcome to Victorian London. You probably won't survive the week, but that's okay. We're just visiting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love knowing how far this little bedtime journey reaches. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. Your eyes flutter open to the grey, smoky haze of 1850s London. Before you even register what you're looking at, your body goes on alert because of the smell. It's not just one smell. It's all of them braided into a thick, invisible rope and shoved directly up your nose. There's a human waste, soot, sweat, stale beer, cabbage stew from a week ago, and a strange, sweet rot that you will never fully identify, but will come to accept as part of daily life. You sit up. The mattress beneath you feels like someone tried to replicate hay using disappointment. The sheets, if you're lucky enough to have them, are scratchy and damp, like they've never known the concept of dry. Your first thought isn't, where am I? It's, why do my teeth feel like they've been coated in wool? This is your new reality. You've woken up in a city of 2 million people, most of whom have never heard the word sanitation, pronounced with hope. If you're poor, and statistically you are, you're sharing this 10 by 12 foot room with at least 5 other people. Maybe more. You don't know them all. One of them might be snoring, another might be coughing, like their lungs are actively leaving the chat. You'd like some privacy. That's adorable. The wallpaper is peeling and mottled with green in the corners. Not a pattern. Mold. You squint and realize some of it is moving. The window is closed to keep the cold out, but the air inside is thick and wet. It's the kind of humidity that clings to you like guilt and makes your skin feel sticky before you've done anything wrong. But congratulations, you're alive. That's more than can be said for plenty of people around here. Cholera is doing numbers this season and typhoid is making a comeback. But hey, you've got your wits about you and a curious mind that wants to know how people managed to survive a time when toilets were luxury items and nobody thought bacteria was real. You swing your legs out of bed and your feet hit the floorboards with a reluctant thud. If you're rich, the wood might be clean. If not, there's a good chance you'll step on something that squishes or skitters. Welcome to Victorian hygiene, where clean is more of a vibe than a standard. Outside the streets are already stirring. The clatter of horseshoes on cobblestones blends with the low hum of people beginning their daily grind. Their shouting, coughing laughter, humanity in its rawest form. The smell, unfortunately, only intensifies as the day warms up. It turns out that coal smoke and body odor bake into a rather complex aroma when left under a summer sun. But you're not heading out just yet. First, you need to freshen up. That's in quotes because what you're about to do wouldn't pass modern health codes, but it's the best the century has to offer. If you're lower class, your morning routine starts in the same room where you sleep, eat, argue, and occasionally get philosophical about the nature of fleas. You head to the washstand, a wooden table with a cracked ceramic basin and a pitcher of cold water that looks like it's seen things. Cold because hot water takes effort. It has to be boiled on the stove downstairs, carried up, and frankly nobody has time for that. So it's cold. Always. You pour water into the bowl, splash some on your face, and try not to gasp from the temperature. Your hands, your armpits, and a few other spots get the sponge bath treatment. It's less bathing, and more polite negotiation with filth. You use a cloth that is technically clean, though its last bath may have been in water you'd now classify as haunted. And this dear sleeper is what most people called clean. They believed daily full-body bathing was dangerous. The medical wisdom of the time said water could seep into your body and cause all kinds of trouble, weakness, madness, spontaneous death. Historians still debate whether this belief came from misapplied ancient medicine or just a collective fear of getting cold and wet. What's wild is that people really thought they were doing hygiene right. It's not like they were walking around thinking I'm disgusting. No, they looked at their weekly sponge off and thought, nailed it. And in a way they had, because everyone around them smelled the same. Your personal bouquet of coal smoke, boiled cabbage, and sweat layered under 3 petticoats wasn't a problem if everyone else was wearing the same fragrance. When filth is universal, nobody has the moral high ground. Now, if you're middle class or even upper crust, the basics improve slightly. You might have a maid bring up water for a bath. A real bath in a tub made of copper or porcelain, but hot water still needs to be boiled and several buckets worth. And then you'd sit in that warm stew of effort and feel momentarily clean, until your sibling, or cousin, or the governess used the same bathwater after you. That's right, bathwater was a family affair. First add the mum, then the kids in age order. By the time it got to the youngest, it was more soup than soak. You sigh, and take it all in trying to picture this world as it was not how it's been sanitized for period dramas. There's no violin music playing. There's just the clatter of wheels, the bray of donkeys, the occasional scream, and a smell that will cling to your dreams. You look around your humble quarters and marvel. Despite it all, people lived, loved, raised families. They figured out how to find joy while marinating in historical grime. And with that, you're ready to face the day. Or at least shuffle toward it with minimal ambition. Just remember, this is only part 1. We haven't even gotten to the egg yolk shampoo yet. The sun is just high enough now to spill a pale greyish light through the grime-caked window, casting everything in your room in a soft jaundiced glow. It's not quite warm, but it's enough to remind you that the city outside is stirring, and so should you. But first, your daily hygiene ritual, such as it is. In this century, a full bath is rare, and frankly a little suspect. If you told someone you bathed every day, they might look at you like you just announced a plan to jump into the Thames with your mouth open. Because Victorians weren't just skipping the tub out of laziness, they genuinely believed too much bathing could kill you. Yes, kill you. Doctors warned that overexposure to water could weaken the constitution, especially if you were already a bit fragile. Water was thought to seep into the body, disturbing humors, weakening organs, and inviting death. You'd probably get a pamphlet about it if you asked too many questions. So instead, the sponge bath ruled the day. It was practical, economical, and didn't involve the risk of wet death. You reach for your washcloth or what passes for one. It's a rag really, and it's stiff from yesterday's drying effort, smelling faintly of ash and lye. You dip it into the cold water in the basin. No soap. Soap is expensive and you don't waste it unless your hands are visibly soiled or you're heading to a funeral. You begin to wash. Face, hands, armpits, and if you're feeling extra virtuous, down there. These are known as the important bits. Everything else that can wait until bath day, which might be next week, or the next. And yes, you're standing in the middle of your bedroom to do this, no curtains drawn. Privacy, like indoor plumbing, is something only rich people really think about. Everyone else gets used to seeing body parts and hearing suspicious splashing sounds at odd hours. The neighbors aren't scandalized, they're just relieved it's not their turn. You wash fast. The water is cold and your breath hitches every time the cloth touches your skin. You're not awake until your spine gets that icy slap from a rushed pass across the back. A true Victorian caffeine substitute. If you're middle class or slightly better off, you might have access to hot water. But let's not get excited. It involves asking someone, probably a child or servant, to boil it in the kitchen, carry it up multiple floors without spilling it, and pour it into a portable copper tub. By the time the water is ready, you've burned half the day and all your goodwill. Still, the idea of sitting in warm water feels luxurious. You close your eyes and imagine it just for a moment. A tub, steam, clean skin, no neighbors coughing behind the wall. Then the sound of someone outside hacking into a pail yanks you back to reality. Some households share tubs. A popular method is for the whole family to take turns in the same water, in order. Dad goes first, then mom, then the kids from oldest to youngest. By the time it's little Timmy's turn, the water has developed both a personality and a smell. It's basically a broth. This shared bath routine was so common it inspired entire chapters in Victorian etiquette manuals. Don't linger in the water if your siblings are waiting, one guide advised cheerily, as though bathing in someone else's filth was a treat you'd want to prolong. Historians still debate whether Victorians genuinely thought this was hygienic, or if it was just cheaper than boiling water 3 times in one night. There were even rules for washing while traveling. Travel guides warned, never wash your face with public water unless it has been purified with ammonia or alcohol, which is to say either bring your own flask of whiskey for your cheeks or just accept your fate. You finish your sponge off and begin to towel yourself dry with a square of cloth that's been drying on the footboard for a week. It's dry technically. It's also the texture of wood. Your shoulders relax a little. That's it. That's the morning bath. A ritual of endurance and modest hope. You fought the good fight and you smell less terrible than yesterday, which in Victorian terms is a victory. The upper classes, of course, had their own version of this experience. Wealthy families might have bathtubs, big, impressive copper ones that had to be dragged upstairs and then filled by hand. Some even had early plumbing, water closets they were called. Very modern, very French, and very likely to leak. But even the wealthy weren't bathing daily, twice a week if they were hygiene fanatics. Once a week was more typical. The logic being, why risk dying from a bath when you could simply sponge bathe and live? This belief was so embedded in the culture that entire books were published on the correct and moral ways to wash. One particularly grim manual warned that washing your hair too frequently would cause scalp hysteria. The remedy: an ice compress followed by silence. A comfortable sigh escapes you as you realize no matter how chaotic your modern mornings feel, at least you're not negotiating a truce with cold water and ammonia-soaked towels. You step into your clothes, which, let's be honest, haven't been washed in a while. But they were aired out overnight, and that counts. Sort of. The shirt smells faintly of smoke, old bread, and survival, a scent that could be bottled and called London No. 5. You smooth the front of your shirt, slick back your hair with a bit of spit and bravado, and face the door. Clean by Victorian standards, alive by modern miracle, still curious, and we haven't even gotten to hair care yet. You're dressed now, well as dressed as anyone in 1850s London could reasonably be, without multiple servants and a silk cravat. Your shirt is buttoned mostly, your boots are laced almost, and your hair is, well, let's talk about the hair. You run your fingers through it and stop midway. It's stiff, like it remembers something traumatic. That's because it hasn't been washed in a week, or maybe more. Honestly, you've lost track. That's normal here. Hair washing wasn't a daily ritual. It wasn't even a weekly event. It was a special occasion. For most people, especially women, hair washing was a once-a-month ordeal. And it was an ordeal. No shampoo, no conditioner. Just you, your hair, and whatever was in the kitchen that you could reasonably slather on your scalp. The most popular product, eggs. Yes, raw eggs. You'd crack them right over your head and massage the yolks into your scalp. The theory was that eggs added shine and nourishment. The reality: your head smelled like breakfast for the next 2 days, especially if you didn't rinse thoroughly. If eggs weren't available, or if they'd already gone off, people turned to other household items. Vinegar and water was a favorite. It cleaned, kind of, but also left your head smelling like a pickled cabbage. Tea was also common, especially strong black tea, which doubled as a rinse and a makeshift dye. Feeling fancy. You might reach for rum. Yes, alcohol. Not for drinking well, also for drinking, but for washing. A splash of rum and water was said to invigorate the scalp and leave your hair full of vital airs. Historians still debate whether this was genuine hair science or just an excuse to open a bottle before noon. And then there was rosemary water, which at least smelled pleasant. People would boil sprigs of rosemary, strain the water, and use it as a rinse. It was believed to stimulate hair growth, or at the very least distract from the fact that your head hadn't touched real soap since Queen Victoria's last garden party. Men's grooming was slightly simpler, shorter hair, fewer expectations, but still no shampoo. A good rinse with cold water and maybe a touch of pomade or bear fat if you could afford it. Pomade was made from animal fats, scented oils, and sometimes wax applied liberally to create a glossy finish and keep everything in place. And by everything, we mean dirt too. But let's return to women's hair, because here's where things get interesting. A woman's hair was considered her crowning glory, long styled and never ever cut. Washing it too often was considered reckless, so instead they maintained it through brushing. Lots and lots of brushing. Picture it you in front of a mirror brushing your hair for 20 minutes a night, coating the bristles with dust oil and pomade residue. But hey, brushing distributes oils evenly, right? That's what they said. And by brushing, they meant brushing through snarls thick as rope over scalps that hadn't been fully rinsed in weeks. To keep hairstyles intact between washes, women often applied oils or waxes, some homemade, others purchased from apothecaries with names like Dr. Blackwell's Follicle Tonic or Madame Louise's Secret Growth Serum. Ingredients range from perfectly innocent things like lavender or castor oil to more questionable elements like turpentine or camphor. And once styled, that hair stayed styled. For days, sometimes weeks. It was pinned, coiled, and padded into elaborate shapes that defied both gravity and basic hygiene. You didn't take it down every night. You wrapped it in a cloth or cap and slept sitting up to preserve the shape. So, if you're wondering how everyone managed to walk around with big Victorian hairstyles, it's because they never took them down. The smell, though, that was layered. You've got the natural scalp oils, the animal fat pomades, the week-old egg rinse, the coal dust from walking outside, plus perfume. Lots of perfume. It created what one 19th century writer described as a warm and lingering atmosphere. That's poetic for rancid cheese soufflé with lavender overtones. Now imagine summer, the sweat, the heat, the top bun melting slowly into your neck like a dairy product left on a windowsill. You'd touch your hair and it would squish slightly from the build-up. Delightful. If lice appeared, and let's be honest, they did, you had options. Some people used kerosene, others used vinegar, some just ignored them and hoped for the best. Hats helped. Big ones, decorative, functional, parasitic camouflage. Wigs were another route, especially for older women or those with thinning hair. But wigs had their own maintenance rituals. They were styled professionally, perfumed aggressively, and often worn for weeks without cleaning. You didn't wash a wig. You powdered it, perfumed it, and hoped the insects moved out on their own. One odd historical fact, some wig styles were so elaborate that women slept with their heads resting on wooden blocks to preserve the shape. That's right, no pillow. Just a neck prop, like a fashion-forward vampire. And we haven't even touched on hair dye yet. Victorians were all about restoring youthful color. The go-to product, Hall's Hair Renewer, promised to bring back your natural shade with no unpleasant odors or staining. What it didn't mention, the key ingredient was lead. People were literally massaging lead into their scalps. Historians still debate whether they knew it was harmful or just assumed the dizziness was part of the rejuvenation. You finish running your fingers through your own hair, suddenly very aware of how clean it is by comparison. No egg yolk, no rum, no slow cooking oil slick forming at the nape of your neck. Just clean, manageable hair in a world where shampoo exists and lice are not inevitable. And as you wrap a kerchief around your head just to blend in, you catch your reflection in the cracked mirror and offer yourself a sleepy little grin. Still here, still learning, and still smelling better than 90% of Victorian London. You step outside now, hairpinned, face splashed, body spot cleaned, and prepared as much as anyone can be to face the world. The foggy London air greets you like a damp towel flung to the face. It clings, it crawls, it smells faintly of ash manure and what you hope is just stale beer. Your stomach growls, and your first thought is food. But before breakfast, you run your tongue over your teeth and instantly regret it. It feels like a furry blanket has settled in overnight camping between your molars, pitching tents on your tongue and throwing a bonfire party in your gums. Welcome to the dental horror show that is Victorian oral hygiene. Toothbrushes do exist, but you probably don't have one unless you're well off or very vain. The common toothbrush of the time has a carved wooden handle and bristles made from animal hair, often boar, sometimes horse. They're stiff, uneven, and have the comforting texture of a straw broom, plus they shed. So, brushing your teeth could sometimes mean ending up with bristles stuck between them, which really added to the ambiance. And that's if you could afford one. A decent brush could cost what you'd normally spend on food for a week. Most people didn't make that trade. Instead, they relied on natural methods, which sounds lovely, until you realize it means gnawing on celery, rubbing chalk on their teeth, or swishing soot mixed with vinegar. That's right, soot, as in fireplace residue. Add some water, maybe a dash of salt, and you've got yourself a budget-friendly Victorian toothpaste. Historians still debate whether these methods were actively harmful or just extremely optimistic. There's also powdered cuttlefish bone. If you've ever wondered what it would feel like to rub a seashell against your teeth, the Victorians have an answer. Crunchy, gritty, slightly fishy. If you're lucky, your household might make a tooth powder of crushed charcoal and baking soda. Though most of these were DIY projects and often included mystery herbs or whatever was hanging in the pantry, some people even used urine as a rinse. We're not going to talk about that. You're trying to sleep tonight. Now let's say you've got a toothache. It's bad. Throbbing. Keeps you up at night. There's no Novocaine, no antibiotics, and no licensed dentist within miles. So where do you go? The barber. Or the blacksmith. Yes, the man who shaves beards or shoes horses is also the neighborhood tooth extractor. He's got pliers. He's got a strong grip. He's got zero medical training. The experience goes something like this. You sit in a chair, you open your mouth, you grab the nearest object to squeeze, and then he yanks. Quickly, hopefully. If you're lucky, the tooth comes out whole. If not, well, there's always next week. No anesthesia, no antiseptic. Just you, your pain, and a shot of brandy that'll make you forget your own name for 10 minutes. One curious fact. Some barbers actually advertise their painless tooth removal services with signs like, no more than a moment's discomfort, which is Victorian for you'll scream briefly and then black out. Dental hygiene was a luxury, not a routine. And because regular brushing and flossing weren't a thing, most people lost their teeth early. By the time you reached 40, if you were lucky enough to make it that far, your smile was a patchwork of gaps, stumps, and mismatched survivors. False teeth were an option, but not a good one. They were carved from wood, molded from ivory, or made using the teeth of deceased individuals. Sometimes these were animal teeth. Other times, they were real human teeth, purchased from grave robbers or battlefield scavengers. That smile in your neighbor's mouth could be half Waterloo. George Washington's famous dentures weren't wooden, by the way. They were made of human teeth, horse teeth, and a bit of lead for flair. Historians still debate whether his infamous grimace was due to pain, embarrassment, or just general 18th century vibes. Back in London, most people just let their teeth rot. It was easier. You avoided hard foods. You adjusted your speech. You learned to smile with your lips closed. Eventually, you accepted that chewing was a young man's game. Mouthwash, a splash of gin, breath fresheners, dried herbs or cloves if you could afford them. If not, you just hoped your conversation partner had a weak nose or strong stomach. Still, people found ways to make it work. They chewed mint leaves. They rinsed with salt water. They avoided sugar, not for health reasons, but because it was expensive. Ironically, this may have saved more Victorian teeth than any dentist ever did. As you walk through the crowded street, you notice how few people actually open their mouths when they talk. They mumble, they grunt, they whisper. Smiles are rare. Not because they weren't happy, but because they weren't confident their front tooth wouldn't come flying out. And yet even in this grim dental landscape, there were those who took pride in their teeth. Some people invested in gold caps. Others used whitening powders made from crushed bones and chalk. There was even a popular teeth tincture that claimed to restore brightness and youthful gleam, though it contained hydrochloric acid, which unsurprisingly dissolved enamel like it was sugar in tea. You run your tongue across your own teeth again and wince. Maybe you'll try the celery trick later. For now, you're just grateful to live in a time when toothbrushes are affordable and brushing your teeth doesn't involve charcoal and silent prayers. And as you round the corner toward the bakery, the smell of warm bread mixing with soot and sewage, you offer a quiet thanks to your molars. You don't have many left, but they're hanging in there. You've survived your morning wash, navigated the wilds of Victorian oral hygiene, and now your body is partially clean. Your breath is less aggressive and your stomach is growling like a chimney. Sweep denied his supper. But before you get to breakfast, let's take a moment to appreciate the other great Victorian hygiene hurdle: laundry. Doing the laundry today might involve pressing a button, maybe two, maybe a little detergent and a Spotify playlist while the washer hums quietly in the background. Peaceful, predictable, hygienic. Now erase all of that. Because in 1850s, London doing laundry was a heroic act, a back-breaking day, a devouring skin-chapping ritual that required more patience than a Sunday sermon and more upper body strength than a prize fighter. Let's start with the basics. There are no washing machines, no dryers, no detergent, no stain remover, no Febreze, no scented beads that whisper ocean breeze into your hoodie. It's just you, your hands, some murky water, and whatever homemade soap you can scrounge up from lard ash and good intentions. Laundry day. Yes day, singular, usually happened once a week if you were ambitious. But for many people, especially the poor, it was more like once every 2 weeks. Or month. Or when your clothes could finally stand up on their own and threaten to walk away. You start by hauling water. Buckets of it. From the pump in the street or a shared well. It's heavy cold and your fingers go numb by the time you've filled your third pail. Then you light the fire. Heating water takes forever and the steam fills your little home with a smell that's somewhere between boiled wool and wet dog panic. Now it's time to scrub. You've got a washboard if you're lucky. If not, it's just a flat stone or the side of a bucket. You take each garment, your only shirt, your partner's stockings, a child's stained petticoat and scrub, like your life depends on it, which honestly it might. Lice, bacteria, and God knows what cling to cloth like regrets cling to a bad haircut. Stains are treated with creativity. Oil stains, use chalk, grass, try lemon juice if you can get it. Blood, use kerosene. Yes, actual kerosene. One slip and you're flammable, but hey, at least the shirts are bright. For odors, people turn to milk. Soaking garments in sour milk was believed to banish smells. Historians still debate whether this worked or just traded one smell for a milkier one. And for whitening urine? Yes, human urine. Because urine contains ammonia, and ammonia is a natural bleaching agent. So people would collect their own and their neighbor's community spirit and soak clothes in it to get that fresh from the chamber pot brightness. The smell during this process is indescribable. But we'll try. Imagine mixing wet sheep vinegar, burned socks, and public restroom floor on a humid day. Then amplify it by heat because the fire you use to boil water is now making everything worse. You scrub, you rinse, you wring each item out by hand, which turns your knuckles red and raw, and then you drag the clothes outside to dry if you have a clothesline. If not, it's chairs, railings, tree branches, or the occasional compliant goat. It takes hours, all day sometimes, and that's just for one batch. And remember, this isn't optional. Dirty clothes weren't just unpleasant, they were dangerous. In the absence of germ theory, people still understood that filth led to sickness. They might not know the why, but they could see the consequences. Wealthier households had laundry maids to do this work, and by do we mean suffer through. These women had hands like stone and backs like oxen. They'd scrub the entire family's clothes, often by candlelight, and go home to do it all again for themselves. It was common knowledge that laundry maids rarely kept their fingernails and often their sanity. And the irony, after all that work, most people still wore the same clothes for days, even weeks at a time. Undergarments, if you had them, might be changed a bit more often. But outerwear, you didn't just wear it. You inhabited it, you bonded with it, it became your second skin, and if you left it unwatched, maybe your third roommate. Which brings us to the glorious truth of Victorian dress, those beautiful gowns, jackets, and high collars we see in period films. They weren't fresh, they weren't clean, they were weathered. The hems crusted with mud, the seams stained with sweat, the cuffs frayed from repetition. It was theatre. Smelly, wrinkled, beautiful theatre. Laundry soap was another concern. Good soap was expensive and often reserved for company linens. Most people made do with homemade lye soap, which could strip the color from your dress and the skin from your hands. Gentle wasn't a word in Victorian soap marketing. Effective, aggressive, or capable of melting your buttons, sure. But gentle? Not so much. And yet somehow people found dignity in this process. They lined their clothing with newspaper to absorb sweat. They stitched lavender or pennyroyal into hems to mask body odor. They layered, wrapped, pinned, and fluffed until they looked at a distance like they had their lives together. A fun off-topic fact, some people added starch to their collars and cuffs, not just for crispness, but to repel dirt longer. A stiff collar didn't just signal class, it was a protective barrier against the world. So the next time you throw a load in the washer, remember the people who soaked their socks in urine and hoped it didn't rain before they dried. The next time your dryer buzzes and your clothes are warm and fragrant, imagine a world where laundry day meant blisters, burns, and a small existential crisis. And as you pass by someone in Victorian London, wearing 3-day-old breeches and a smile, you give them a respectful nod, because that person has survived laundry day. And that's worth more than any medal. Your clothes are on. You've endured your Victorian bath, done your best with your teeth, and narrowly avoided poisoning yourself with hair products made of kitchen condiments. You've survived a laundry day without setting your sleeves on fire. Now you step fully into the day, buttoned up, cinched tight, corseted, or collared, depending on your gender, and ready to blend into the great unwashed. But let's not talk about fashion today for aesthetics. Let's talk about clothing as defense. Because in Victorian London, your outfit was more than a style statement. It was armor. Scented armor padded with sweat grease, smoke, and stubborn optimism. Let's start with what you're probably not wearing underwear. If you're poor, it's likely you're going commando. Not as a choice. Not as a rebellion. Simply because linen undergarments are expensive, and who's got time or soap to wash them regularly? For many working class men and women, underclothes were an occasional luxury. You had one pair, maybe two. You rotated when possible. You hoped no one noticed the smell. The wealthy, of course, had more layers. Linen undershirts, petticoats, chemises, drawers, corsets, bustles, crinolines, waistcoats, overcoats, gloves, stockings, more layers than an onion in winter. For women, especially, getting dressed was a full-body commitment. A single outfit might include 7 to 10 pieces, all made of heavy absorbent fabrics that clung to sweat like a toddler to your ankle. Corsets were the foundation laced tight pressing organs into unnatural positions and rarely washed. Why? Because washing a corset meant unstitching the boning whalebone or metal, scrubbing the layers of fabric by hand and letting it dry for a day or more. So most women didn't wash them. They just wore them again and again and again until they could smell them coming. Petticoats were equally rebellious against hygiene. They dragged along the streets, picking up coal dust, horse dung spittle, and things best not examined, and they were rarely washed more than once a month. Why bother? They were hidden and therefore not part of polite society's concern. And let's not forget the fabrics. Wool, velvet, brocade, cotton if you were lucky. All designed to hold form, hold warmth, and absolutely hold on to smells. Deodorant didn't exist. Perfume helped, but it was like throwing a lavender sachet into a burning tire yard. If you're wearing a dress or a coat today, there's a strong chance it hasn't been washed in weeks. It might have been aired out, brushed, dabbed with cologne, but not washed, which means you carry yesterday's onion soup and this morning's coal smoke like invisible accessories. Historians still debate whether the upper classes were aware of how much they reeked, or if everyone was just so accustomed to their own scent clouds that no one noticed anymore. A quick sensory snapshot: you are standing in line at the bakery. Ahead of you is a butcher's apprentice in stiff wool that smells like blood and tobacco. Behind you is a woman in 3 layers of skirts all dusted with flour, and her perfume is struggling to keep up. Around you are people breathing, sweating, coughing, and wrapped in fabric that has been marinating in their lives. And you know what? They thought they looked fabulous. Because they did. To themselves. Clothing wasn't just fabric. It was identity. It showed class, ambition, moral character. If you were clean or appeared clean, it meant you were worthy, trustworthy, good. Even the colors played a role. Dark colors, black, navy, deep green, were preferred not just because they were fashionable, but because they hid stains. A splash of soup, a smear of coal dust, just another shade of elegance. Men's suits were made from thick wool that could go weeks without cleaning. They were brushed, not washed. And ties, waistcoats, and gloves were used to mask the signs of wear and odor. A gentleman might carry a scented handkerchief, not just to dab his brow, but to discreetly hold over his nose when the street stench got aggressive. And the smell on the street, it's relentless. Imagine every person around you is sweating through multiple unwashed layers. They're exhaling into the air without brushing their teeth. They're walking through piles of horse manure, then stepping into shops, churches, homes. Everything carries that same weight fabric that holds odor like a sponge holds soup. This was the era of scent, layering, not by design but by default. Women might sprinkle rose water onto their dresses. Men might rub clove oil into their coat lapels. Perfume was both mask and message. Yes, I smell like boiled mutton, but also bergamot and ambition. There's a particular Victorian trick worth mentioning: camphor bowls, small pouches filled with camphor lavender or dried herbs sewn into dresses or pinned inside jackets. They were like little anti-smell grenades, absorbing funk and projecting a hint of effort. Whether they worked is up for debate, but it was better than nothing. By mid-afternoon, your clothes feel heavier, not from added weight, but from the world seeping into them. Smog clings to the sleeves. Street smells sneak into your collar. You shift and your shirt whispers with the friction of dried sweat and wool. You think about changing clothes, but you only have one other outfit. And you wore it last Sunday. And it smells worse. So you do what every Londoner does. You carry it. You layer confidence over discomfort. You straighten your collar, tighten your shawl, and walk like you smell like roses, even if it's more like roasted parsnips and perseverance. and strangely, you admire them for it. These people lived in a world where cleanliness was rare, but dignity wasn't. They managed to look composed while marinating in musk. They showed up dressed up, stood in crowded rooms, and still offered each other tea. That's not just resilience, that's theatrical hygiene. So you pull your coat a little tighter and step out into the swirl of smells and steam and layered humanity, and you feel oddly proud to be part of this sensory soup. Because in Victorian London, surviving the day without visibly wilting was a quiet triumph. The street greets you like an old dog with muddy paws and questionable breath, loyal familiar and a little too close for comfort. You've stepped outside into the belly of the beast now, the open air of Victorian London. And what greets you first isn't the sound or the crowd or even the wagons creaking past. It's the stench. You'd think by now your nose would have surrendered, gone numb from the barrage of coal smoke, stale sweat, and overboiled onions. But no. Every breath brings something new, something layered, something uniquely terrible, like a bouquet composed by someone who's never smelled a flower. Welcome to the public streets, a place where hygiene takes one look around, sighs heavily, and decides to go back inside. The ground under your feet isn't just dirty, it's alive. Mud, manure, garbage, and horse urine mix in a swirling, ever-changing soup of city detritus. The streets are technically cobbled, but between the wagon ruts, broken stones, and piles of unidentifiable matter, it's more like a slalom course for the desperate. You hop to one side to avoid a pile of something steaming. Maybe it's horse dung. Maybe it's human. Historians still debate how much human waste actually made it onto the street versus being dumped into back alleys or chamber pots flung from upstairs windows. But based on the smell, you're willing to vote a lot. Let's talk horses. London runs on them, pulling carts, taxis, buses, deliveries. There are over 50,000 horses clopping around the city at any given moment, and guess what? Each one produces 30 to 35 pounds of manure per day, per horse. Do the math. The city is not just alive with people, it's marinating in horse poop. The roads are thick with it. When it rains, the manure dissolves into a sludgy river that rushes downhill like it has somewhere to be. When it's dry, it bakes into a crust that crumbles underfoot, rising as a choking dust cloud with every passing wheel. People walk through it. Children play near it. Food carts park beside it. You try not to think about what's on the soles of your boots as you step into the bakery queue. And then there's the smoke. Coal is everywhere. Homes are heated by it. Factories eat it by the ton. Street lamps burn it into the night. The result is a permanent haze that hangs over the city like a judgment. Everything is slightly grey from the sky to the bricks to the people's coats. If you try to wipe your face, your hand comes away blackened, as though you've just hugged a chimney. Your lungs begin to feel it too. The cough is called London throat, a raspy, constant tickle that turns into something worse if you stay too long. Children especially grow up with lungs seasoned like coal cellars. But nobody thinks too much of it. Everyone coughs, everyone wheezes. It's just the sound of being alive. You pass by a fruit vendor. His apples look like they've seen better decades. Covered in dust, maybe soot and the occasional mystery splotch. You wonder how long they've been out here. Then you wonder what they've absorbed. Smoke, urine, vapor, flea market energy. It doesn't matter. People still buy them because fresh food is freshish and hygiene is negotiable. Next, you hear the squelch of a cartwheel turning through something thick. A delivery man curses under his breath, wipes his hands on his apron, and proceeds to handle loaves of bread like nothing happened. Gloves, sanitation, please. He's lucky if the rats don't chew through the bottom of the cart before noon. And oh, the rats. They are the unofficial mayors of London, quick, fearless, always watching. They scurry through alleys over rooftops and across shop floors like they own the place. Because frankly, they kind of do. And they're clean compared to some of the puddles you've just walked past. Now let's talk garbage. There's no garbage collection, no trash bins. People throw their waste into the street, banana peels, bones, broken crockery, old shoes, ash from the fireplace, fish heads, used rags, dead pets. It all goes out the window or onto the curb or into the alley. Out of sight means out of responsibility. The city employs scavengers, rag and bone men who collect usable scraps to sell. They dig through refuse looking for bones used for glue cloth, used for paper or metal melted down. It's recycling before recycling was a thing, but with more typhus. Children sometimes help. Poor kids will root through rubbish piles barefoot, picking out coal chips, nail heads, or anything worth half a penny. You step around one such pile now and notice something squirm. You do not investigate. The sidewalks are better if you're lucky enough to walk on one. They're raised intended to keep pedestrians out of the muck. But even here, the grime finds you. Someone spits. Another man relieves himself casually into the gutter. A woman empties a bucket from an upstairs window. It lands with a wet slap that sends droplets spraying across your boot. You don't flinch. You're adapting. One historical note of morbid charm, the streets were often sprinkled with ashes or sand to soak up waste. Sometimes even sawdust. It helped with traction. And smell. Kind of. If you're imagining the streets of London as a sort of chunky soup-grey broth with floating solids, you're not far off. And yet, people walk, they talk, they laugh, they shop, they live, they carry on like it's normal, because to them it is. The smells, the grime, the rats, the soot, the slime, it's all part of the ecosystem. It's just how the city breathes. Inhale, exhale, gag slightly. And keep moving. You start to notice that you're not the only one walking carefully. Everyone watches where they step. Everyone knows the risk of slipping into something that'll stain your clothes and possibly your soul. And still somehow, there's beauty here. A child skipping rope. A couple laughing in spite of the smell. A dog tail wagging completely unbothered by the human chaos around him. You find a kind of rhythm in the mess. The city pulses, it groans, it stinks, but it moves forward. And so do you. Because if nothing else, you've made it down the street without falling in horse poop, and that, dear listener, is considered a good start to the day. You duck under a laundry line strung haphazardly between two buildings, a limp shirt fluttering like a truce flag in the damp morning air. You've sidestepped muck, dodged a rogue chicken, and made it nearly half a block without stepping in anything new and offensive. That's when you see it. A woman leans out of an upstairs window holding something ceramic round and very full-looking. You lock eyes for half a second. She gives a resigned little shrug, and then she tips it. You jump back just in time. The chamber pot strikes again. In Victorian London, indoor plumbing isn't something most people enjoy. In fact, most people haven't even heard of it. Toilets as you know them are rare luxuries found only in the fanciest of homes, if at all, and even then they're more decorative than effective. For the rest of the city's millions, they do their business the old-fashioned way in pots, under the bed, in the corner, wherever fits. You see, when nature called in the middle of the night, no one wanted to stumble out into the dark, filthy streets, especially during winter or heavy fog. So people kept a chamber pot under their bed. Convenient. Sort of. It was essentially a ceramic bowl into which you'd relieve yourself. Then cover with a lid and pretend it wasn't there until morning. Then what? Well, if you were responsible, you'd carry the pot to a shared privy, a hole in the ground in a backyard outhouse shared with everyone in your building. Maybe 20 families, maybe more. A single wooden seat over a pit that hadn't been emptied since Napoleon was a toddler. The smell was an entity all its own, solid, pungent. It could peel the paint off your soul. But let's be honest. Not everyone made the trek to the privy, especially if it was raining, or snowing, or if the privy was already overflowing, which it often was. So the contents of the pot went where many things in Victorian London went out the window. sometimes with a shout, gardez-le, a mangled version of the French gardez-l'eau, meaning watch out for the water, but often with no warning at all. And so, it became normal to walk down city streets with one eye on the sky and a fast foot ready to leap back at any sudden sound. Historians still debate how seriously people took the whole warning yell thing. Some accounts insist it was common courtesy. Others suggest people gave up figuring if you were unlucky enough to be directly beneath, that was just Darwin at work. So now imagine day after day the sidewalks and gutters collecting the contents of chamber pots from thousands of homes. And not just urine, oh no, there were solids involved. Plus washing water, rotting food, dead rats, and whatever other bits people no longer wanted inside. All of it dripping down buildings and pooling in the streets. And what happens when it rains? The streets flood. Not dramatically. Just enough to create charming little rivers of brown stinking water that wind their way toward the gutters, and eventually, when the city is merciful, toward the Thames. But here's the kicker. The Thames was also the drinking water source. Yes. The very river into which all these chamber pot sewers, waste ditches, and sad accidents were dumped. That's where people got their water. For cooking, for washing, for tea. You let that settle for a moment. You breathe through your mouth and thank the modern world for filters and indoor plumbing. So who cleaned all this up? Enter the night soil men. It was their job to go around at night, of course, and empty cesspits and privies. Armed with shovels, buckets, and the kind of willpower forged in the deepest corners of hell, they dug out the city's filth, one load at a time. The work was so revolting, it was literally illegal to perform during the day. Not out of sanitation reasons, just decorum. The men would haul human waste up from basement pits, load it into carts, and trundle it out of the city, often to sell to farmers as fertilizer. That's right, waste was a commodity. You'd eat a cabbage that had grown in the very refuse of your neighbor's digestive decisions. Circle of life. And yet, as London grew, even the valiant efforts of night soil men couldn't keep up. The city was producing more waste than it could bury, burn, or forget. Cesspits overflowed. Waste seeped through floorboards. Families awoke with the smell of sewage thick in their lungs. Basements flooded. Children played near puddles that no one dared name. You once heard of a house that exploded not from gas, but from the methane buildup in an unventilated privy. Boom! Victorian home destroyed by poo. This, of course, led people to take even more shortcuts. Why risk the privy or wait for the night soil man when the window is right there and gravity is free? And so the practice continued. Morning walks became obstacle courses. Residents on lower floors carried umbrellas for reasons not related to weather. People began to develop a sixth sense for staying dry. You walk quickly, eyes up, breathing shallow. Oddly enough, the wealthy didn't fare much better. Sure, they had water closets, the early ancestors of the toilet. But without modern plumbing, these were just fancy chutes that led, where exactly, into a cesspool in the basement. A literal tank of human waste festering beneath the parlor. And when that tank filled up, you called the night soil men. Again. And if you forgot or waited too long, the smell would start rising. Through the floorboards, into the hallways, into your lungs. Imagine waking up in your velvet canopy bed silk sheets tucked around your shoulders and breathing in the scent of 1,000 meals past. You step back as a child runs past barefoot and giggling blissfully, unaware that they're kicking through a puddle of something that may or may not have been someone's dinner and then someone's problem. You admire their resilience and their immune system. Still, life went on. People adapted. They wore higher boots. They walked in zigzags. They accepted that public life came with private fluids. And as you pass another window, just barely ducking a slosh of something unspeakable, you realize this isn't just a dirty city. It's a city in denial. A city that pretends the streets are clean as long as no one talks about the smell. You walk a little faster, You check the sky before passing under balconies. You breathe through your scarf, and you think there's got to be a better way. You're not alone. By the end of this decade, the pressure will boil over. London is headed for a reckoning, but not yet. For now, the pots are full, the windows are open, and the sidewalks glisten with secrets. It's mid-morning now, and the air is warming, always a mixed blessing in Victorian London. Warmer air means drier laundry, yes. But it also means the city's collective stew of bodily functions, coal smoke, and rotting garbage begins to rise like steam from a witch's cauldron. The scent settles into your clothes, your hair, even your dreams if you're not careful. And it's about to get worse. Because this, dear listener, is the story of the day London's hygiene problem couldn't be ignored anymore. A story so pungent, so inescapable, that it finally moved even the most stubborn and perfumed members of Parliament to act. This is the Great Stink of 1858. Now, to be clear, London had always smelled bad. Visitors complained of it for centuries. Locals accepted it like an eccentric relative, unpleasant but unavoidable. But in the summer of 1858, something shifted. The weather turned hot. Not just mildly sticky hot, scorching, relentless, dry, day after day of blazing sun without a drop of rain. The Thames, already thick with sewage from thousands of chamber pots and overflowing cesspits, began to cook. Let's back up. By this point, London had over 2 million people, and the river had become a liquid landfill. Human waste, animal waste, industrial chemicals, slaughterhouse runoff. If it could dissolve or float, it ended up in the Thames. And during normal years, the current could just barely carry it away, far enough downstream that everyone could pretend it didn't exist. But not in 1858. That summer, the water level dropped. The heat intensified. And the sewage that normally drifted downstream sat there, and festered, and fermented. For weeks. Soon the riverbanks were rimmed with thick brown sludge. The surface bubbled, the smell apocalyptic. People described it as a sharp, sweet clinging, like something had died inside a cabbage and decided to open a bakery. Even the most hardened Londoners, those who'd survived typhoid outbreaks and public hangings, found themselves gagging in the streets. Children vomited on the way to school. Adults fainted on bridges. Stores near the river had to close because customers couldn't stay conscious long enough to purchase anything. Newspapers dubbed it the Great Stink, and for once no one thought they were exaggerating. Still, the government dragged its feet. After all, the poor had been dealing with these smells for years. Why rush now? Then the wind shifted. You see the Houses of Parliament sit right on the Thames. Very picturesque. Lots of Gothic architecture and long speeches. And in the summer they opened the windows for ventilation until the stink came in. And when it came in, it stayed. It soaked into the curtains. It curled under the doors. Members of Parliament tried everything, soaking drapes in lime-dousing walls, with disinfectant, even contemplating moving the government to a different city. But nothing worked. The smell of raw sewage in the 100-degree heat was immune to potpourri. One day the stench grew so unbearable that entire sessions had to be abandoned. Lawmakers fled the building holding handkerchiefs to their faces like delicate aristocrats fainting at the sight of a bad wig. And suddenly things changed. Now that the upper classes were affected, really affected solutions were demanded. Meetings were called, funds were approved, and into this mess stepped a man with one of the worst jobs in engineering history, Joseph Bazalgette. You have to admire Bazalgette. He didn't flinch. He didn't faint. He didn't dramatically quit and move to the countryside. He rolled up his sleeves, probably metaphorically. This was not a place for exposed fabric, and got to work. His plan built an entirely new sewer system for London. Not patch the old one, not shovel the streets, not pass out scented scarves. No, he wanted to dig brick pipe and divert the entire city's waste away from the Thames. Permanently. The scale was enormous, over 1,000 miles of sewers, tunnels, drainage lines, pumping stations, embankments to hold the new infrastructure, and all of it had to be built while the city continued to function. People still lived there, worked there, stepped over rats and waste to get to the pub. Workers began digging in shifts. They carved deep beneath the streets, laying brick by hand, creating massive intercepting sewers designed to catch waste and ferry it far away from the city, ideally downstream where it could be dumped at high tide and at least pretend it belonged to someone else. It took years. They demolished houses, rerouted roads, dodged historical ruins. At one point, Bazalgette's workers had to lift entire buildings onto temporary foundations just to lay sewer pipes underneath. The cost astronomical, in today's money billions, the disruption constant. But the result, miraculous. The smell vanished. The Thames, once a rotting soup of despair, began to run clearer. Not clean exactly, but no longer toxic to breathe near. Disease rates plummeted. People stopped dying from cholera in such horrific numbers. Children could walk near the river without vomiting. Even the fog started to lift. Of course, the system wasn't perfect. Waste was still being dumped into the river just further downstream where it was now someone else's problem. And the poor neighborhoods waited years longer than the rich to be connected, because some things unfortunately never change. But London had made a leap. From a medieval cesspool to a modern city. From stink-induced paralysis to actual civic planning. From chamber pots flying out windows to indoor plumbing that, while primitive, worked. And it all started because someone in Parliament finally said, "We can't keep doing this." You stop for a moment on the edge of the river, staring down at the now gently swirling water. It doesn't look clean, but it also doesn't look like soup. You take a cautious breath. You still regret it. But you also recognize what a triumph this is. A city that once marinated in its own waste, day after day, century after century, had decided it deserved better. And thanks to one summer of unbearable stink and one very determined engineer, it actually got it. Your shoes squelch as you turn to leave the riverside path. You're not quite done with this filthy city, but you're beginning to understand it. London didn't start out clean. It clawed its way there, one sewer brick at a time. The river is behind you now, or at least far enough away that the smell becomes a memory instead of a present danger. You continue walking through the winding lanes past chimney sweeps with soot in their ears and bootblacks hunched on crates until you pass a looking glass in a shopfront and catch a glimpse of yourself. That's when it hits you. Not the smell this time. The face. Pale. Blotchy. Shiny in the wrong places. And your lips, dry as old parchment. It's time we had a very delicate talk about beauty. Because while the Victorians were battling sewage on the streets and grime in their clothing, they were waging an entirely different war on their own bodies, especially women. Beauty wasn't just desirable. It was expected, demanded, and dangerous. Let's start with the face. Pale skin was the holy grail. Why? Because it showed you didn't work outside, that you weren't labouring in fields or factories, that you had leisure and by extension class. A tan wasn't exotic, it was embarrassing. The mark of toil. So women went to extraordinary lengths to lighten their skin. Not just with parasols and gloves, though those helped, but with makeup. Well, poison really. Face powders were made with lead ground finely and mixed with vinegar to create a thick white paste. It stuck to the skin like plaster and gave a deathly porcelain look that was all the rage. Unfortunately, it also seeped through the skin, causing headaches, stomach problems, and eventually neurological damage. But hey, you looked fantastic. Cheeks were rouged with mercury salts, another crowd favorite in the Victorian vanity cabinet. A dab on each cheek gave a charming flush and possibly accelerated organ failure. But your admirers wouldn't notice the tremors. they'd be too busy admiring your radiant glow. Lips were tinted with carmine made from crushed beetles, sometimes mixed with lead or other metals to deepen the hue. Lipstick wasn't applied in casual bathroom mirror glances, it was layered with precision and locked in with beeswax, or if you were really fancy, a dab of oil scented with musk. Historians still debate whether that musk came from actual musk deer or a less noble source. And if you wanted to get really wild with your look, you could try belladonna eye drops. Yes, the same belladonna that is toxic in almost any dose. A drop in each eye made your pupils dilate, giving you that dreamy, just about to faint expression that was considered incredibly alluring. Never mind the blurred vision and potential blindness, but the face was just the beginning. Let's move to the scalp. We've already discussed the hair oils and the egg shampoos, but here's something new: hair dye. And by dye we mean chemically infused scalp punishment. A popular product at the time was Hall's Hair Renewer, which promised to restore your youthful locks to their original color. Secret ingredient lead acetate. Lead. That's right, women and men were massaging lead directly into their scalps. Over time, this caused hair loss, headaches, and in some cases, actual blackening of the skin. But at least the grays were gone. Another curious practice, using nitrate of silver to darken hair. It worked sort of, but exposure to sunlight would turn it purple. So if you didn't rinse properly, you might end up with lilac sideburns and no explanation. One documented oddity involves the use of ammonia and indigo paste to create a rich black color. But the fumes were so overpowering that some women fainted mid-application. Fashion is pain, they said, and occasionally unconsciousness. Now let's get weird. Some women applied raw meat to their faces overnight, thin slices pressed to the cheeks like Delhi beauty masks. The theory: it prevented wrinkles and preserved youth. The reality: it attracted flies and probably confused your husband. Butter was another favorite moisturizer. Slather it on, let it soak in, and hope your face didn't smell like toast the next day. Other moisturizing options included lard, goose fat, and in one case, boiled milk left to sour. Skincare, it seems, was a farm-to-face affair. One odd off-topic fact: Queen Victoria reportedly detested makeup, calling it vulgar. So many women pretended they weren't wearing any. They powdered in private stained lips with fruit peels and blamed their glowing complexions on fresh air and good breeding. It was all smoke and arsenic-scented mirrors. Fashion didn't help, of course. Women wore tight corsets which restricted breathing and sometimes deformed ribs over time. But you couldn't be seen in public without one. You'd be loose, literally and metaphorically. Corsets were rarely washed, soaked with sweat, and occasionally blood if they pinched wrong. Underneath all that were layers of petticoats, drawers, and chemises, all of them absorbing your body's protests. And on top, gowns so heavy they could drag along the street, soaking up mud horse manure and ash. But what mattered was the look. You were to float, glide, appear unbothered even if your legs were covered in soot and your lungs were contemplating rebellion. Men had their burdens too, though perhaps less poisonous. They slicked their hair with pomades made from bear grease, pig lard, or petroleum jelly. The smell was, let's say, noticeable. Facial hair was a point of pride, beards, mustaches, sideburns often styled with wax and scented oils. But beards also trapped smoke food particles and any airborne bacteria the city had to offer. Shaving was done with a straight razor often shared between customers at the barber. No sterilization. Just a quick rinse in questionable water, and on to the next phase. If you shaved at home, you risked cutting your throat with every pass. No pressure. And yet people tried. They endured. They powdered. They perfumed. They slept with their hair in rags, their faces covered in butter, and their pores gasping for mercy, all in the name of beauty. They didn't have spa days. They had survival days. And if they made it to church on Sunday without a facial rash or bloodshot eyes, it was considered a win. You pause in front of a pharmacy window, now eyeing the bottles behind the glass. Complexion Tonic 1 says, removes blotches and improves moral character. Another promises youthful radiance and marital success. You wonder how many of them contain mercury. And you think of the women layering lead onto their faces, painting poison onto their lips, all while smiling at the mirror and whispering, beautiful. Somehow against the odds, they were, because beauty in any century isn't just about health. It's about defiance, about hope, about painting your face and facing the world even if your rouge might kill you. And so with a soft exhale, you turn away from the glass and walk on. Your skin is clean, your lipstick non-toxic, your lungs blessedly still functioning, and you are deeply, endlessly grateful. You're still walking your boots heavy with street dust and the lingering dread of arsenic-laced beauty cream when you hear it a scream. Not the theatrical kind, this is sharp, guttural, real. You turn, see a crowd gathering and catch a glimpse of something on the ground. A man is convulsing, his face is red, his body jerks, and someone yells for a doctor. And that's when the real horror begins, because in 1850s London, calling for a doctor is not necessarily a sign of hope. It might actually make things worse. Welcome to the world of Victorian medicine, where science is, let's call it aspirational, where guesses pass for facts and treatments range from ineffective to actively murderous, where a headache might be diagnosed as nervous vapor and the cure might involve leeches, mercury, or drilling a hole in your skull. Let's begin with what doctors didn't know. Germs. The germ theory of disease wouldn't be widely accepted until the late 19th century. In the 1850s, the dominant belief was miasma theory, the idea that illness came from bad air. Smells were dangerous, foul odors were the enemy, which explains why people burned sulfur in hospital rooms and sprinkled vinegar on the floor. They thought if they could purify the scent, they could purify the sickness. Historians still debate why germ theory took so long to catch on. Some blame entrenched medical traditions, others cite professional arrogance, but whatever the reason, the result was the same: people died needlessly. So, what did doctors actually do? Let's start with bloodletting. Feeling sick. Obviously your body has too much blood. The solution: let some out. You might be cut with a scalpel, or more fashionably have a few leeches placed on your neck, arms, or temples. The leeches did their job with great enthusiasm. You meanwhile became anemic and woozy and frequently more ill than before. Have a fever must be an excess of bile. Take this calomel, a mercury-based laxative that will flush your system and maybe your kidneys too. Got a cough? Here's some opium. Got indigestion? Try arsenic bitters. Sore throat? Let's swab it with nitrate of silver. Too alert? Time for a lid tonic. And if you were lucky, none of these would kill you immediately. One curious fact: arsenic was also used cosmetically to brighten the eyes and pale the skin. A dab here, a sip there, and soon you were glowing like a haunted candle. And not long after, you were vomiting blood in a discreet floral handkerchief. But wait, medicine wasn't just internal. Let's talk surgeries. Picture this: you're in pain. Your appendix maybe. Or your leg is shattered. You agree to surgery because, well, the pain is worse than the fear. Except there's no anesthesia. Ether exists by this time, but it's risky, inconsistent, and often skipped entirely, especially outside wealthy hospitals. Instead, they hand you a leather strap to bite, pour some whiskey down your throat, and hold you down. The surgeon approaches. His tools are cleanish. Probably used them earlier that day, maybe on a corpse. There's no sterilization, no gloves, just him, a scalpel, and the clock. Because the longer it takes, the more chance you'll go into shock or bleed out. He works fast, efficient. It's less about precision and more about speed. A good surgeon could remove a limb in under 3 minutes. A great one could do it in 2. But either way, the pain is so intense that your vision goes white. You scream. Maybe you pass out. If not, you'll wish you had. And then comes the real danger: infection. Because no one knows about bacteria, your wound is left exposed. Maybe wrapped in linen. maybe touched by 10 different unwashed hands. There's no antiseptic, no antibiotics, just hope. Gangrene sets in, or tetanus, or sepsis, and that's it. You die in bed surrounded by loved ones who can only hold your hand and wonder if maybe you should have just kept the leg. Hospital mortality rates in this era are staggering. Some London wards had death rates of over 50%. Going to the hospital was often considered more dangerous than staying home. People literally preferred to die in their own beds than risk a visit from the doctor. Still, for the very poor, there weren't many options. Workhouse infirmaries provided rudimentary care, usually in overcrowded, underfunded, unsanitary conditions. A single nurse might care for 40 patients. One wash basin might serve a whole ward. The air was heavy with sickness, the floor sticky with spilled medicines and other things. And yet people tried to get better. Some turned to patent medicines, miracle tonics sold by traveling salesmen, or advertised in newspapers. Dr. Holloway's Cure All. Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. The Elixir of Life. Most were mixtures of alcohol, morphine, sugar, and blind optimism. Mrs. Winslow's, by the way, was marketed for teething babies and contained opium. Yes, opium for infants. It worked. Babies stopped crying, and sometimes breathing. Addiction was rampant. People didn't call it that, of course. They just said nervous complaints or sensitive digestion and drank their third bottle of laudanum before tea. You pass a chemist's shop now and glance at the dusty bottles in the window. You see words like tonic restorative elixir. You wonder how many lives these saved and how many they ended. One academic theory is that many of the era's upper-class women were addicted to opiates without realizing it. They took sleeping draughts, every night woke groggy, took nervous tonics by morning, and wandered through life in a pleasant, foggy haze. Historians still debate whether this contributed to the trope of the delicate, fainting Victorian lady, or if it was just the corsets. And yet, through all of this, progress was brewing. Louis Pasteur was working on germ theory. Joseph Lister would soon revolutionize surgery with antiseptics. Public health advocates were starting to see the connection between clean water and lower disease rates. But that's later. For now, you live in the in-between, a city with brilliant thinkers, but no hand-washing protocol. A place where the same scalpel might visit 10 people in one day without ever meeting soap. You walk a little slower now, not out of fear, out of respect. Because surviving illness in this city wasn't just luck. It was a feat of endurance, of timing, and sometimes a decision to do absolutely nothing. You pass the man from earlier. He's breathing now, sweating, pale. A neighbor holds his hand and murmurs soft encouragement. The doctor miraculously never came, which might be the reason he's still alive. The day wears on, and your thoughts drift toward food. Your stomach rumbles gently, reminding you that in this strange and sooty world you haven't yet eaten. But something holds you back. A subtle hesitation. Maybe it's the memory of the rat you saw earlier eyeing a sausage roll like it owed him money. Maybe it's the smell wafting from the fishmonger's stall, a heady mix of salt vinegar and existential doubt. Or maybe it's this simple truth: Victorian food was terrifying. Let's begin in the kitchen, if you have one. For most working-class families, the kitchen is just a corner of a single room with a small hearth, a chipped kettle, and maybe a few pans if you're lucky. There's no refrigerator. Refrigeration hasn't been invented yet. Iceboxes exist, but they're rare and expensive. Ice itself is imported, if you can believe it, from places like Norway and stored in massive sawdust-lined warehouses. So instead of cold storage, food is kept on shelves, in cupboards, or just out, at room temperature. Which in Victorian London varies between chilly damp and why does this milk smell like feet? Meat spoils quickly, milk curdles, vegetables wilt or rot. Bread goes hard and moldy. You can't just toss things out, though. Food is expensive. Wasting it is not an option, so you do what millions of Londoners do: you eat it anyway. Slightly green meat, Scrape off the worst bits, cook it thoroughly, and mask the flavor with spices. Soured milk, boil it. Call it cheese. Moldy bread. Cut off the edges and pretend it was always the shape. Hunger makes you creative. One popular method of preservation is salting. Meats are packed in salt until they're more crystal than flesh. When you finally eat them, they're chewy dry and aggressively sodium forward. You don't bite this meat, you negotiate with it. Another method is smoking. Hams, fish, sausages smoked for hours or days over low fires until they dry out and develop that tangy, slightly carcinogenic finish we now associate with certain artisanal delis. Except here, the smoke isn't filtered. It's just coal smoke, soot and hope. Then there's pickling. You name it, they pickled it. Onions, cabbage, eggs, even meats. If it can be submerged in vinegar, it's dinner. The taste sharp, the texture questionable, the survival rate better than average. But when all else fails, the final preservation strategy is simple: eat it fast and pray. Now imagine you're shopping. You head to the market stalls, dodging puddles and children and horses. Vendors shout their wares, some fresh, some still technically edible. There's meat hung in the open air buzzing with flies, bread stacked on open carts, cheese that moves slightly if you watch too long. Historians still debate the nutritional value of Victorian cheese. Some of it was truly aged, some was just sentient. There's no regulation, no expiration dates, no food safety inspectors. A butcher might wipe his blade on his apron already streaked with 3 other animals and go back to slicing pork. A baker might bulk up his bread with sawdust or chalk to save on flour. A milkman might water down the milk with Thames water. Yes, that water. One odd but true fact: milk was often mixed with plaster of Paris to make it look thicker. The result? Children drinking paint-grade slurry with their porridge. Which brings us to adulteration. Food fraud was rampant. Ground coffee might be part chicory, part gravel. Sugar might be cut with powdered glass. Candies were brightened with arsenic or lead-based dyes. The brighter the sweet, the more likely it would turn your tongue and possibly your kidneys interesting colors. A fun detail. Green candies often got their color from copper sulfate, a known toxin. Children loved them. Parents did too, until they started noticing symptoms like nausea, tremors, or sudden unconsciousness. The government didn't do much. Food safety laws were minimal and poorly enforced. If you complained, vendors could just pack up and move stalls. And besides, most people didn't even know food could cause illness. They blamed bad air, weak constitutions, or simply fate. Now you might think the rich were safer. Not always. Wealthy families hired cooks. These cooks had better tools, sure, but they were still working with the same questionable ingredients. Meat sat on marble counters for hours. Milk was unpasteurized. Eggs might be weeks old, and no one refrigerated leftovers. Food for a banquet might be prepared early in the day and sit out all afternoon before being served lovingly, warmed by the ambient heat of 6,000 candles. Some delicacies were horrifying by modern standards. Jellied eels were a staple. So was potted meat, a mystery blend of organs, fat, and spices packed into jars and left to ferment slightly. Cheese might be served with maggots still in it. A sign of authenticity. You pause now outside a pie shop. The smell is divine, meaty, savory, rich with gravy and buttery crust. But then you remember Victorian meat pies had no ingredient labels. The filling might be pork, or rat, or pigeon, or last week's pork. No one's checking. There were scandals, of course. Rumors of dog meat in taverns, of butchers recycling scraps from the gutter. One infamous story involved an inn that served human flesh. It was never proven. But that didn't stop the legend, or the stomach aches. And for the poor things were worse. They shopped in off-markets where vendors sold near-spoiled food at a discount. Bruised fruit, half-molded bread, meat on the edge of decomposition. If you were lucky, you got it early. If not, you got it cheap. Street food was common: meat pies, eel soup, hot potatoes with questionable butter. But the vendors cooked over open fires, stored ingredients in old tins, and often didn't wash their hands. Hygiene wasn't just lacking, it was unimaginable. And still, people ate. They had to. Hunger doesn't care about contamination. You take your pie, your cloudy ale, and your pickled egg and sit on a bench trying not to think about what the egg used to be. You ate fast. You chewed bravely. And if you didn't get sick, you called it a success. Oddly, alcohol was safer than water. Beer, ale, and gin were brewed, which killed off most bacteria. Even children drank small beer, a low-alcohol version given with breakfast. Babies sometimes got it too watered down with more beer. Water was for washing, maybe. But for drinking, alcohol, always. So you walk on hungry but cautious, caught between the charm of warm bread and the reality of butter stored beside a chamber pot. And you realize something important. Victorian people weren't reckless. They were resilient. They learned to taste, to sniff, to scrape, to eat what they had, to survive with what was available, to find joy in hot food even if it came with a side of danger. And tonight, when you open your fridge and smell nothing but safety, you'll remember the city that made soup from whatever didn't kill you. You're wandering now slowly as the city winds down into the haze of late afternoon. The sun is lower, the shadows stretch longer, and a subtle weariness settles over the streets. But even as shops close and footsteps slow, one thing doesn't stop flowing in Victorian London alcohol. And it's not just the grown-ups. Because in a world where the water could kill you, the most reasonable beverage option, bizarrely, beautifully, dangerously, was beer. Let's unpack this. The Thames, as you now know, was a swirling cocktail of sewage refuse and questionable intentions. Public pumps, even when functional, often drew from contaminated groundwater. So the safest option wasn't water at all, it was alcohol. Enter small beer. Low in alcohol, sometimes as low as 1%. It was weak enough not to get you drunk, but strong enough to kill bacteria. It was brewed fast, drank faster, and became the default drink in many households. Children drank it. Grandparents drank it. Pregnant women drank it. Even babies had sips of it in their porridge. Historians still debate whether people were mildly buzzed all the time or just perpetually underhydrated and exhausted. Probably both. But beer wasn't the only liquid courage floating through the city. Let's talk about gin. Gin had exploded in popularity in the previous century, especially among the poor. It was cheap, accessible, and, let's be honest, numbed the horrors of daily life. By the 1850s, the infamous gin craze had mostly passed, but its legacy remained. Every alley seemed to have a gin shop. Every pocket had a coin just large enough for a warm shot. You pass one of those establishments now. A wooden sign creaks above the door. Inside, the light is dim, the floor sticky, and the patrons speak in slurred poetry. They don't drink to celebrate. They drink to forget. But this isn't just about recreational boozing. Alcohol was used medicinally, constantly. Got a fever brandy. Coughed with honey. Indigestion port wine. Restlessness, laudanum, alcohol mixed with opium. Grief beer, shock whiskey, toothache rum. And if none of that worked, there was always the tried and true Victorian remedy: collapse onto the nearest fainting couch and drink until you see angels. Which brings us to one of the most heartbreaking parts of the era's medical history: children. Children drank. Not just sips of beer or wine at special occasions, not just the occasional medicinal brandy. Daily, routinely, without ceremony. Infants were given soothing syrups to help with teething, colic, or crying, often mixtures of alcohol, morphine, and sweeteners. These syrups knocked babies out for hours, sometimes days. The results were quiet nurseries, grateful parents, and horrifying outcomes. One of the most popular, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. tagline for children teething, content opium, alcohol, and sugar. It was wildly effective and wildly lethal in large doses. But nobody regulated dosage. Parents just guessed. Even older children drank small beer or diluted wine with meals. Not because they wanted to, but because water made them sick. A cup of water could bring cholera, dysentery, or typhoid. A mug of ale might give you hiccups, but it wouldn't kill you. And so, a society of semi-sober children toddled through the soot-pale and proper cheeks, stained with rouge and breath tinged with hops. Alcohol was a constant presence. It flowed through teacups, medicine bottles, church fundraisers, and working-class lunchboxes. It was safer than water, more comforting than doctors, and often cheaper than soap. One odd off-topic fact. Some Victorian employers actually provided alcohol as part of wages. Factory workers received daily beer rations. Dockhands were handed shots of rum at the start of their shift. Builders got a midday pint to steady the hands. OSHA was not a thing. You stop in front of a corner shop now. Its shelves are lined with bottles, some clear, some amber, some green and mysterious. The labels promise things like tonic for the nerves elixir of calm drops for sleep. You don't need to read the ingredients to know there's alcohol in all of them. Possibly opium. Maybe chloroform if it's a fancy batch. And the line between medical use and daily habit, almost non-existent. Everyone was self-medicating. From the Duchess sipping sherry between embroidery stitches to the chimney sweep nursing a half-pint with coal under his nails. From the grocer with his pocket flask to the widow with her bottle of tincture by the bed. They drank to warm up, to calm down, to wake up, to sleep, to dull pain, to mark joy, to pass time, to soften grief. The pubs became sanctuaries, not places of rowdy escape, though those existed, but of brief reprieve. For a few pennies you could sit in the dark sip, something that wouldn't poison you, and pretend just for a moment that life didn't smell like rotting fish and horse dung. Of course, not everyone indulged. The temperance movement was rising, a wave of moral reformers who warned of alcohol's dangers. They held rallies, published pamphlets, organized tea clubs. They meant well, but for many working-class families, tea didn't pay the bills. Gin at least made the cold nights tolerable. You keep walking, passing a group of boys sharing a crust of bread and a bottle of something cloudy. One of them toasts the air. They can't be older than 10. And your heart aches a little. Because this wasn't decadence, this was survival. In a city where the water could kill you, the medicine could kill you, and the food might betray you, a cup of beer was a rare constant. Predictable, comforting, almost pure. Almost. You stop at a pump in the street. A woman draws water, sniffs it, frowns, and walks away. You know what she's thinking, better not risk it. And so she'll go home, boil her tea with gin, tuck her children in with brandy, and take a few drops of something strong to help her sleep. She won't wake up tipsy. She'll wake up safe. The sun is now a smear of orange behind the chimneys, and a soft grey settles over the rooftops like ash from a quiet fire. The streets are calmer, the shouting softened into murmurs, boots replaced by slippered shuffles, and somewhere nearby, a violin plays an off-key tune that still somehow feels perfect. It's the sound of a city catching its breath. And in the quiet, something remarkable stirs beneath the grime and fog, a transformation not of cobblestones or chimneys, but of attitudes. Because slowly, very slowly, the Victorians began to realize that being clean, truly clean, might be more than just a luxury. It might actually be a virtue, a status symbol, even a moral obligation. Let's begin with a simple, slippery bar of soap. In the early 1800s, soap was expensive, made in small batches with animal fats and lye it stung. The skin smelled like boiled regret and was harsh enough to strip paint. Most people used it sparingly, if at all. A single bar might last a family week's rationed like butter in wartime. But by the mid-century, the Industrial Revolution reached the soap cauldrons. New methods of mass production, new blends with gentler ingredients, and suddenly soap got cheaper. Still not cheap enough for everyone, but affordable enough for the rising middle class to start thinking maybe we should wash more than once a week. And the soap makers, they saw opportunity. Enter the golden age of Victorian advertising. Companies like Pierce Wrights and Lifebuoy didn't just sell soap, they sold aspiration. Their ads weren't about cleanliness, they were about character. Wash your hands and prove you're virtuous. Scrub your face and become desirable. Bathe your children and be a good mother. Soap became a shortcut to decency. Billboards and broadsheets showed glowing families with radiant complexions and sparkling smiles achieved apparently through soap and a generous application of Photoshop's great-great-grandfather imagination. These ads didn't just target women. They guilted them. Would you want your guest to see your husband's collar dingy one read, "Is your child's skin telling the world you don't care?" asked another. Cleanliness wasn't just next to godliness. It was next to reputation. Historians still debate how much of the hygiene revolution was driven by health concerns versus sheer social pressure. But one thing is clear. Being dirty was no longer just unfortunate. It was suspicious. And so the tide turned. Middle-class families began investing in washstands, not just a bowl and pitcher, but stylish furniture designed for daily grooming. Towels became more common. So did mirrors. People brushed their hair more often, washed their hands before meals, changed clothes between work and dinner. Slowly, what had once been weekly rituals became daily ones. Children were taught hygiene as discipline. Hands behind ears, teeth brushed with chalk, fingernails inspected like they held state secrets. Schools even introduced hygiene lessons, blending science with shame and just a dash of Protestant guilt. And the poor, they did what they could. Soap was still a luxury for many, but now they were judged for not using it. Their clothes might be patched, their wages tiny, their homes overcrowded, but if they didn't smell of lavender, or at least not of fish, they were labeled lazy, immoral, or worse. The charity movements responded. Public bathhouses began to appear especially in working-class neighborhoods. These weren't spas. They were tiled rooms with iron tubs and lukewarm water, but they were clean. And they were hope. For a small fee, a man could soak the coal dust from his skin. A woman could scrub away the sweat of a factory shift. A child could splash without the fear of rats swimming past. It was basic, but it was transformative. And it sparked something. The idea that everyone, regardless of class, deserved dignity. A clean body, a clean home, a clean start. Reformers, many of them women, began pushing harder, not just for baths, but for sewers, garbage collection, clean drinking water, better housing. They organized, lobbied, marched. They wrote pamphlets with titles like "The Moral Necessity of Cleanliness" and a washcloth in every hand. One off-topic but delightfully bizarre fact: some reformers believed strongly that foot hygiene could prevent crime. Clean souls, they claimed, which is a pun no one asked for, but bless them for trying. Advertising played a curious double role. On one hand, it perpetuated unrealistic standards and moral pressure. On the other, it helped normalize hygiene. Soap wasn't just for the rich. Now, it was in every general store, every magazine, every hopeful conversation between mothers and daughters. Even men got dragged in. They were told to trim their beards, brush their teeth, shine their shoes. "A tidy man is a trustworthy man," the ads whispered, or yelled. Victorian copywriters weren't subtle. Doctors, too, began to catch on. Germ theory finally gained traction. Surgeons started washing their hands. Instruments were boiled. Hospitals got cleaner. Infection rates dropped. Survival rates rose. It was no longer madness to say soap saves lives. And yet, despite all this progress, old habits lingered. In many homes, bathing still wasn't daily. Underwear still wasn't washed often. Clothes were still worn until they protested audibly. But the expectation had changed. even if people couldn't afford to be clean all the time they wanted to, they felt the pressure, the shame, the possibility. It's hard to explain just how radical this was. For centuries, hygiene had been incidental, seasonal, practical only. But now it was part of identity. To be clean was to be respectable, responsible, civilized, and for many, finally human. You pass a soap advertisement painted on a brick wall. The paint's peeling, the colors faded, but the slogan still shines for those who dare to rise above. You smile, because yes, it was just soap. But for the Victorians, it was also a ladder. One slippery lavender-scented rung at a time. The sky is dark now. Lamps flicker to life yellow pools of flame behind smoky glass, and the city takes on that quiet, strange stillness found only in places that never truly sleep. You can hear it in the clip-clop of a lone cab horse, in the soft murmur of a family behind closed shutters, in the rhythmic creak of the Thames gently slapping its embankments. The worst of the day is over, and in this dim, gaslit hush, something new begins to settle in hope. Because by the end of the Victorian era, something profound had happened. Not just cleaner streets, not just more soap, but an actual transformation of the human condition, a rethinking of what cities could be, what people deserved, what health could mean, not just the absence of illness, but the presence of dignity. Let's look around. The sewer system, once a marvel of brick and ambition, has become a daily miracle. You don't see it, or smell it, or think about it, but it carries away the filth that once defined the city. The same waste that triggered cholera epidemics, clogged gutters, and scented parliament is now gone by sunrise, carried far from your door, like a dark thought whisked away on morning wind. Public bathhouses, once a novelty, have become neighborhood landmarks. Children laugh in their tiled chambers, workers soak away the soot. Women share whispered stories between rinses. Soap lathers, warmth rises. Clean water touches skin like a blessing. For a few pennies, anyone can feel human again. Schools teach children how to wash, not just their hands, but their faces, their clothes, their thoughts. Teachers speak of microbes, tiny, invisible monsters that flee from boiling water and vinegar. Students listen, learn. Bring these lessons home where they ripple outward one clean towel at a time. Doctors armed with germ theory and antiseptics begin to save more than they harm. They wash their hands, they sterilize their tools. Surgeries still hurt, but they no longer guarantee death. Hospitals once feared, as the last stop before the grave, become places of healing. And the women, oh the women, they've led this quiet revolution, not from pulpits or thrones, but from wash basins and cradles and street corners, where they demand fresh water, safe homes, and basic respect. They've marched, petitioned, cleaned, cared. They've buried children and still risen to fight for others. Historians still debate the role of these women's clubs and charity leagues, whether their motives were moral, religious, or pragmatic. But the outcome is clear. They changed everything. They brought hygiene into the conversation. They made it political, spiritual, personal. They made it matter. And now even the poorest Londoner walks a little taller. Maybe he still shares a room with 5 others. Maybe she still wears the same dress 3 days in a row. But now when they wash their hands or brush their hair or scrub the floor, they're not just surviving. They're participating in something bigger. A cleaner city, a safer life, a shared belief that filth is not fate, that we should expect better. It's not perfect. The rivers still carry their burdens. The air is still thick with coal smoke. Some neighborhoods remain forgotten, but the direction has changed. No longer downward into the mire, but forward, upward, toward light and water and soap. You sit now on a wooden bench near a narrow street, watching a young woman pour water from a kettle into a shallow bowl. She kneels, dips a cloth, and gently begins to wipe her child's hands. The boy wriggles, yawns, then smiles, sleepy and clean and safe. In that simple act, you see it all. Progress, love, tomorrow. You close your eyes, letting the sounds of the city cradle you. A soft footstep, the faint clink of a teacup, a lullaby hummed behind a curtained window, a cart creaking home with the last of the day's bread, and then you breathe in. Not sewage, not rot, but coal smoke and cold air, and a hint of lavender soap. The century has turned, and so has the tide. The journey through Victorian hygiene began in a world overwhelmed by filth, where chamber pots were emptied into the streets, and the Thames doubled as a sewer and a water source. Personal hygiene was inconsistent at best and perilous. At worst, soap was rare, baths were suspect, and teeth cleaning involved soot and celery. Hair was rarely washed, laundry was backbreaking labor, and clothing served as both fashion and filtration system for an unrelentingly dirty environment. Yet beneath the grime, the cracks of transformation appeared. The Great Stink of 1858 forced Parliament to act, and Joseph Bazalgette's sewer system became one of the greatest public health interventions in history. Slowly, public awareness shifted. Soap became cheaper. Advertising reframed cleanliness as moral virtue. The temperance movement, public health campaigns, and relentless work of women reformers pushed hygiene into the realm of everyday life. Doctors adopted antiseptics. Schools taught hand-washing. Bathhouses opened in working-class neighborhoods. Children drank small beer not because they liked it, but because water was deadly. But by century's end, a cleaner London had emerged, not perfect, but possible. This was not just a tale of disease and dirt. It was a story of human endurance, of people who believed against the odds that they deserved to be clean, safe, dignified. And they built that world brick by brick, basin by basin, soap bar by soap bar. Tonight, as you lie in your clean sheets with running water down the hall, remember it didn't happen by accident. It happened because ordinary people refused to accept filth as fate. Good night.